I call Scott Simpson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. As the first non-Cantabrian to speak in this third reading debate and chairman of the Select Committee, the Local Government Environment Select Committee, it actually gives me enormous pleasure to support my colleague, the Honourable Nicky Wagner, MP for Christchurch Central, who has been sponsoring this bill through the House. This is a very good and momentous piece of legislation. It's a good and momentous day for Canterbury and for the Arts Centre of Christchurch, because seldom in this House do we get unanimity, and I'm hopeful that we will today on this piece of legislation. It's an opportunity for this House to actually put in place a piece of legislation that will provide for a modernised governance structure for the Arts Centre of Christchurch, and one that will help it cope with the massive rebuild that is underway at present, but also that will set it up for the future, for years to come, for the children, grandchildren and great-grandchildren yet born of Christchurch and Canterbury to enjoy and learn to love this arts centre as much as Cantabrians clearly and obviously do already. As other speakers, Mr Speaker, have already indicated, I want to also acknowledge the leadership and contribution of the Arts Centre Chair, Jen Crawford, and Chief Executive, Andre Lovett, who came and presented to the Select Committee when we met in Christchurch. We took the trouble, as the sponsor indicated, to travel to Christchurch, to have a look at the site, to have a look at the restoration, to have a look at the work that's being done with such care and skill by the many able craftspeople who are using skills that probably haven't been seen used in a building site in this country for many, many years. These are craftspeople from around the world who are bringing their stone masonry skills to the Arts Centre for what is believed to be the largest heritage project of its type, the largest restoration heritage project of its type in the world currently underway. Sir, there's absolutely no doubt in my mind as a non-Cantabrian that there is a very special place in the hearts and minds of all Canterbury people for the Arts Centre. It's a place that holds fond memories for many Cantabrians, and we've heard, as this bill has been making its progress through the House, of some of those stories. The purpose of this bill is actually quite simple, sir. It is to enshrine the Trust's objects into statute, to ensure that the Arts Centre continues as a cultural centre for the people of Christchurch and of Canterbury, and for people from other parts of New Zealand, and indeed international visitors as well, who care to visit the site. The bill, sir, consolidates the terms of the Trust's structure, and it modernises the governance arrangements. Both the consolidation and the modernisation are required for the Trust to adapt to its changed circumstances, largely as a result of the Canterbury earthquakes. Modern governance best practice, sir, calls for the establishment of skills-based boards, and this piece of legislation seeks to put in place a board that will be able to draw from the broader, wider community skills that will assist as the restoration project continues over the next 7 years or so, and that will indeed set the governance trust up for the future. It will mean that there is a strong set of skills on the board during the major phase of the restoration that's currently underway. But a truly skills-based board, sir, will create an enduring governance structure for the future, and it's the future that I think is most important, even though this is a very significant heritage project. Current trust deed that the Trust is operating under doesn't actually provide sufficient certainty or robustness to protect the site as most of us would want it protected. If the Trust was ever to be wound up, the current trust deed doesn't provide sufficient robustness in order to ensure that safe hands would be able to manage and secure the future of this nationally important heritage site. And so this bill actually fixes that process. So I want to spend just a minute talking, as others have done, about the history of the site, because it's true to say that it's not just one building. It's an amalgam of a number of buildings built over a number of years, some dating back more than 100 years, of which there are 24 buildings in total. And all but one, 23 of the 24 buildings, were damaged in the Canterbury earthquakes. And it was very fortunate, sir, that the Trust had the good sense and good wisdom to be well insured, and that has meant that the $290 million restoration project can be funded adequately and appropriately. And I think that's going to be enormously important for the future of the site. The site was, of course, originally occupied by the University of Canterbury, plus it was the site of two of Christchurch's original secondary schools. And it's an absolute cultural icon for Canterbury and Canterbury people, housing these days, or in fact before the earthquakes, a variety of arts-focused facilities, not the least of which was the regular market. The current Arts Centre Trust, Mr Speaker, was established way back in 1978, over 40 years ago. And it's fair to say that a lot has changed, not only on the site in that 40 years subsequent, but also in terms of what is now considered to be best governance practice for trusts of this sort. The earthquakes of 2010 and 2011 resulted in very significant damage to the site, and we were able to see that firsthand during our visit. And we were also able to see that, bizarrely, as a result of the earthquakes, some quite unique original work has been rediscovered, because some of the fascia work that had been done in the period between original construction of the stone buildings through until modern times had actually covered up some of the really intricate and lovely, beautiful fretwork and other stonework over the years. So it's now on display, Mr Whip, and it's good to see it. And I commend people who may want to visit Christchurch, then it would be a good thing to do. He's Professor Whip to most of us, Sir Whip sometimes, Mr Whippy. And he's a very fine and highly regarded member of this team. Sir, it's $290 million being spent on this site. It's a 7-year project, and I'm delighted to hear from Nikki Wagner that there is a likelihood that the project will be concluded earlier than the 7 years, and that it will likely come in under budget as well. A revitalised Christchurch Arts Centre is actually symbolic and goes to the heart of the whole Christchurch rebuild. For many Cantabrians, it's a visible, tangible sign and manifestation of what the future holds for a new rebuilt Christchurch, while at the same time protecting the heritage and the history of the site that is so important to so many other people. It provides an opportunity, this legislation, sir, for much greater certainty around the intentions of the Trust, and it provides for the preservation of the architecture and heritage values of the site. The rebuilt centre will, in my view, be an outstanding icon of Canterbury and indeed national significance. One of the things that the bill does, sir, is it codifies the charitable objects of the Trust into statute. And what that means is that a couple of things have been achieved. And one of them is that the objects of the Trust have been separated from the powers of the Trust. And that separation, dealing with the Trust powers, means that if there is to ever be any future change, then that will require a further passing of legislation in this Parliament. I think that kind of protection is very useful and very powerful. The new governance structure, sir, follows a comprehensive review that was initiated by the Trust themselves, and that review included the commissioning of an independent report by the Ministry for Culture and Heritage, and that also involved, as part of that process, very extensive consultation with key stakeholders. And so this, sir, has been a very good process all round. And I want to just, in my concluding comments, again, thank the leadership team, the Chair and the Chief Executive, for their guidance and steady hand through this process. There is absolutely no doubt in my mind, sir, that the result of this legislation will provide an enduring governance structure for the Trust and for the people of Canterbury and indeed New Zealand. I have great pleasure in commending it to the House.
Speaker.